sleepy detectives, and welcome back. I know you're here to settle in and relax, so if you enjoy these stories, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I love knowing where our community is. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, let's get comfortable and jump straight into tonight's story. It is one of the most common, simple, and benign symbols in human culture. A circle, two dots, an upturned curve. It is a symbol of happiness, of childlike innocence, of a good day. But what if that symbol was twisted? What if that simple, happy face became a mark of something else? A signature, a taunt, a final, chilling message left in the dark, overlooking the cold water where a body was found. For over 2 decades, a dark pattern has emerged from the waterways of America. It is a pattern that police have overwhelmingly dismissed. It is a pattern that the FBI has publicly debunked. But it is a pattern that 2 detectives and a growing number of grieving families believe is the truth behind one of the most prolific and elusive serial killer networks in modern history. They are young men, almost always young, white, college-aged men. They are athletic, popular, and successful. They go out for a night with friends. They have a few drinks, they get separated from their group, and then they vanish. Weeks, sometimes months later, their bodies are found, always in a body of water, a river, a lake, a creek. And for almost every single case, the official cause of death is the same: accidental drowning. A tragic but straightforward case of a young man who had too much to drink, wandered too close to the water, and fell in. Case closed. But what about the inconsistencies? What about the victims' phones, which suddenly go dead or travel miles away after they disappear? What about the toxicology reports that show no alcohol or not enough to cause incapacitation? What about the autopsy findings that show a lack of water in the lungs, suggesting they were dead before they ever hit the water? And what about the graffiti? This is the definitive deep dive into the smiley face killer theory. A theory that alleges over 100 mysterious drownings across 25 cities and 11 states are not accidents. They are homicides. We will examine the most compelling cases. We will analyze the chilling evidence. And we will investigate the massive official wall of resistance that has kept this theory buried. Is this, as the authorities claim, just a tragic pattern of accidental deaths? Or is this the truth behind a horrifying conspiracy marked by a single painted smile? Our story begins not with a single case, but with the men who first connected the dots. 2 retired New York Police Department detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. Gannon is a man forged by the streets of New York, a decorated sergeant with decades of experience. Duarte, his partner, is methodical and relentless. In the late 1990s, they were running their own private investigation firm when a father, Bill McNeil, walked into their office with a case that would change their lives forever. Bill's son, Patrick, had disappeared, and Bill, like dozens of fathers who would follow him, refused to accept the simple, easy answer that his son had just fallen. At first, Gannon and Duarte worked the cases individually. Patrick McNeil in 1997, then another, then another. Each case was a tragedy, isolated by geography and time. But as the years went on, the similarities became too loud to ignore. We started to see this pattern, Gannon would later state in interviews. I'm a homicide detective. I know what a homicide looks like. And these were not accidental. The pattern was terrifyingly specific. 1. The victim is a young, intelligent, athletic, white male. 2. He vanishes after a night of drinking at a bar, often with friends. 3. He is missing for a significant period of time, days, weeks, or even months. This detail is critical It suggests an abduction, not a simple fall. 4. His body is eventually recovered in a body of water. The death is almost immediately ruled an accidental drowning, despite the objections of the family. And then, the 6th and most terrifying element. In a significant number of these cases, somewhere near the site where the body was recovered, on a bridge, an embankment, a wall, was a spray-painted smiley face. It wasn't always identical. Sometimes it had horns, sometimes it was just the simple circle, dots, and smile. Sometimes it was accompanied by other cryptic symbols or the word sins. To the police, it was meaningless, just random graffiti in an urban area. To Kevin Gannon, it was a taunt. It was the signature of a killer, or killers, who were proud of their work. By the early 2000s, Gannon, Duarte, and a small team of retired law enforcement officers had formed a pact. They called themselves the Finders. Working pro bono for the families, they began traveling the country, mapping the deaths, building a database of over 100 cases that all fit the same horrifying pattern. They developed a chilling theory. This was not the work of one man. The logistics of abducting a strong, athletic college student, holding him for days, killing him, and then dumping his body in a river, often in a different location, suggested a group. An organized network, communicating via the dark web, operating in cells in different cities, and traveling the I-94 and I-90 corridors, the highways of death that connected these drowning clusters. They believed this group would target a young man, perhaps drug him with a date rape substance like GHB, which is notoriously difficult to detect after death. They would hold him, possibly torture him, and then ceremonially dump his body in the water, leaving the smiley face as a calling card for their network. It sounds like the plot of a terrifying movie, and the FBI, as we will see, was convinced it was fiction. But fiction doesn't explain the details. It doesn't explain the bodies found in water that was frozen solid. It doesn't explain the phone data. And it doesn't explain the look in the eyes of the parents who know their sons didn't just fall. To understand the theory, you must first understand the victims. You must understand the cases that built the foundation of this dark cathedral of evidence. And it all started with the case that first landed on Kevin Gannon's desk, the case of a young man in New York whose father refused to let the world forget him. This is the story of Patrick McNeil. Case File 01, Patrick McNeil, 1997. February 16, 1997, Manhattan, New York City. The air is cold, the kind of biting New York cold that makes the streetlights feel sharp. Patrick McNeil, 21 years old, is a model student at Fordham University. He's handsome, popular, the captain of his high school soccer team. He has a bright future and a loving family. That night, he's out with friends at a popular Irish bar on the Upper East Side, the Dapper Dog. He's drinking, laughing. Witnesses say he was in good spirits. Around midnight, he leaves the bar. He's seen walking down First Avenue, and then he is gone. He doesn't return to his dorm. He doesn't call his parents. He doesn't show up for class. Patrick McNeil, a creature of habit and responsibility, has vanished into the thin, cold air of Manhattan. His father, Bill McNeil, immediately knows something is wrong. This is not his son. The family launches a massive search. They plaster the city with missing posters bearing Patrick's smiling face. The story gets local media attention. Days turn into a week. A week turns into 2. The NYPD, Gannon later claimed, treated the case with a frustrating lack of urgency. They assumed he was just another college kid who went on a bender, or perhaps ran off. But Bill McNeil knew better. This is when he hires Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. Gannon and Duarte begin their investigation, treating it as a potential homicide from day one. They re-interview witnesses from the bar. They retrace Patrick's last known steps. They find nothing. There are no credible sightings, no ransom notes, no activity on his credit cards. It's as if he was erased. The search continues for 57 agonizing days. Then, on April 7, 1997,
A tugboat captain spots a body floating in the East River, near a pier in Brooklyn, about 12 miles from where Patrick was last seen. The body is badly decomposed, but dental records confirm the family's worst fears. It is Patrick McNeil. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office conducts an autopsy. The finding? Cause of death undetermined, but consistent with drowning. The police, officially and quickly, rule the death an accident. They theorize that Patrick, drunk, wandered the 12 blocks from the bar to the East River, stumbled, and fell in. Case closed. But for Bill McNeil and Kevin Gannon, the questions were just beginning. First, the toxicology report. Patrick's blood alcohol content was 0.24, high but not necessarily incapacitating for an experienced college drinker. But the report also showed no signs of the physical trauma one would expect from a 12-block stumble through Manhattan. No scrapes, no bruises. Second, the location. The Dapper Dog was at 94th and 1st Avenue. The nearest point of the East River was a long walk, blocked by the FDR Drive, a major highway. It seemed improbable that he would wander in that specific direction, navigate the complex barriers, and find a precise spot to fall in, all without being seen. Third, the body itself. The decomposition suggested he had been in the water for a long time, but Gannon felt something was off. The way the body was found, the currents, it was too neat. But the real, chilling discovery, the patient zero of the entire theory, came when Gannon and Duarte visited the location where Patrick's body was recovered. On a concrete piling at the end of the pier, overlooking the exact spot, was a spray-painted smiley face, a simple orange-yellow grin. At the time, Gannon admits, he just filed it away, a strange, unsettling detail. It was only later, as the other cases began to pile up, that the significance of that simple graffiti would snap into terrifying focus. Patrick's case was officially ruled an accidental drowning. His family was left with a lifetime of questions and a gnawing sense of injustice. The smiley face on the pier was just a coincidence, until it happened again. Case File 02, Chris Jenkins, 2002. 5 years later, hundreds of miles away, Minneapolis, Minnesota. A city defined by the Mississippi River, which cuts it in half. October 31st, 2002, Halloween night. The city is alive with costumes and parties. Chris Jenkins, 21 years old, is a student at the University of Minnesota. Like Patrick McNeil, he is a model of success, an honor student, a gifted athlete, a beloved son and brother. He's at a downtown bar, the Lone Tree Bar and Grill, with friends. He's wearing a Native American costume. Witnesses describe him as happy but intoxicated. Around midnight, he is asked to leave the bar by bouncers. He gets separated from his friends. He is last seen on camera walking out into the cold Halloween night. And just like Patrick McNeil, he vanishes. His parents, Jan and Steve Jenkins, are immediately alarmed. Chris is not the kind of person to be out of touch. A massive search begins. The family, friends, and hundreds of volunteers brave the freezing Minnesota winter combing in the city. They hang thousands of missing posters. The story dominates local news. The Minneapolis Police Department, however, quickly settles on a theory. They find Chris's backpack abandoned. They hear rumors that he was stressed about school. They conclude that he likely died by suicide. His mother, Jan, is outraged. He was the happiest kid, she insisted to reporters. He had everything to live for. He did not kill himself. The search lasts for 4 long, agonizing months. The winter is brutal. The Mississippi River freezes over. Then, on February 27, 2003, his body is found. He is floating in the Mississippi River near a boat launch. His body is still wearing the Native American costume. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner performs an autopsy. The findings are shocking. Chris's blood alcohol content is 0.12, but more importantly, his body shows almost no signs of decomposition. He is preserved as if he had been kept in a freezer. The ME concludes that he could not have been in the water for the entire 4 months. He likely entered the water after it had frozen and was only released when the ice began to thaw. This directly contradicts the suicide theory. A person committing suicide does not wait for the river to freeze. Despite this, the official cause of death is ruled undetermined, with drowning as the likely mechanism. The police, citing their suicide theory, close the case. But Jan and Steve Jenkins, they fight back. They hire their own private investigators. They petition the police. They hold press conferences. They refuse to let their son's death be dismissed. And they contact Kevin Gannon. Gannon and Duarte fly to Minneapolis. They review the case files, the autopsy, the police reports. They are immediately struck by the parallels to Patrick McNeil's case, the young athletic victim, the disappearance from a bar, the body in the water, the immediate, unsupported ruling of suicide or accident. They visit the area, they look for the sign, and they find it. On a bridge overlooking the river, not far from where Chris was last seen, a clear, spray-painted smiley face. Gannon and his team begin to build their case, but it's the Jenkins family and their relentless pressure that finally breaks the official wall of silence. 4 years after Chris's body was found, in November 2006, the Minneapolis Chief of Police, Tim Dolan, holds a stunning press conference. He announces that the Chris Jenkins case is being reclassified. It is no longer undetermined. It is now officially a homicide. Dolan admits that new information has come to light, though he refuses to specify what. He acknowledges the Jenkins family's persistence, but the most chilling detail is a single sentence. "We believe," Chief Dolan states, "that Jenkins was abducted." This is a bombshell. It's the first and one of the only times a police department has ever publicly validated a key tenet of the smiley face theory. It confirms that a popular athletic college student was taken from a street, held captive for an unknown period, and then murdered, his body dumped in the river. The Chris Jenkins case proved that the accidental theory was, at least in this instance, demonstrably false. It proved that something sinister was happening. For Gannon and Duarte, this was the ultimate validation. The pattern was real, the theory was real, and the smiley face they found was its signature. The case of Chris Jenkins was officially a homicide, though it remains unsolved to this day. His killers were never found. But just as the Jenkins case was being reclassified in Minneapolis, a new cluster of deaths was beginning, one that would earn a small Wisconsin city a terrifying new nickname: the River of Death. The city of La Crosse, Wisconsin, sits on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River. It's a picturesque college town home to 3 universities. It should be an idyllic place to go to school. But between 1997 and 2011, La Crosse became the epicenter of this terrifying phenomenon. In that period, at least 8 young college-aged men vanished from the downtown bar district, only to be found weeks or months later drowned in the Mississippi River. The sheer concentration of identical deaths in such a small area was staggering. It terrified the community and baffled law enforcement, who, time and time again, fell back on the same explanation: accidental drowning. They blamed the bar culture and the river's proximity to the bars. But the families and Kevin Gannon saw something else. They saw a hunting ground. Case File 03, Luke Homan, 2006. Luke Homan, 21, was a student at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. He was a point guard on the university basketball team. He was energetic, beloved, and, like the others, had a bright future. On September 29, 2006, Luke is out with teammates at a bar called Bottoms Up. Witnesses say he was in a bizarrely agitated state. He got into a minor disagreement with another student. He was last seen walking away from the bar, alone, around 1:30 a.m. He is reported missing. The search begins. The lacrosse community, already on edge from the string of previous drownings, holds its breath. 3 days later, on October 2, 2006, Luke Homan's body is pulled from the Mississippi River near a boat landing. The La Crosse Police Department and the medical examiner are swift. The cause of death is ruled an accidental drowning. The police theorized that Luke, agitated and drunk, wandered to the river, fell in, and drowned. They note that his blood alcohol content was a very high 0.32. Case closed. Another tragedy, but not a crime. This is when Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte arrive in La Crosse. They had been tracking the cluster of deaths here for years. The Homan case, to them, is the most brazen example yet. Gannon looks at the 0.32 BAC. To the police, this is the reason he drowned. To Gannon, it's the question. How does a man with a BAC that high, a level that often causes a person to pass out, manage to navigate the nearly half-mile walk from the bar to the river, cross multiple streets and obstacles, and find the water? He speaks to the family. They are adamant. Luke was a responsible person. This was not him. Then, Gannon and his team visit the spot where Luke's body was recovered, and they find it. But this one is different. It's not just a smiley face. Spray painted on a rock wall directly overlooking the recovery site are two distinct symbols. One is a smiley face. The other, right next to it, is a cryptic, multicolored piece of graffiti. Gannon, in his documentary, identifies it as a potential tag for a group. But the most chilling piece of graffiti is the one that gives him the date. Another tag, Sins, is found nearby. Gannon believes the S is a stylized 5. He believes the graffiti is a coded message. Smiley face plus 5 equals smiley face 5. He believes Luke Homan was the 5th victim in this specific La Crosse cell. This, for Gannon, is the smoking gun. This is not random graffiti. This is a taunt. This is a scoreboard. Case file 04, the La Crosse cluster. Luke Homan was not alone. He was simply the most high-profile case in a horrifying series. Before him, there was Jared Dion, 21, vanished in 2004, found in the river, ruled an accident. Before him, Craig Myers, 21, vanished in 2002, found in the river, ruled an accident. Before him, Michael Zdrozel, 19, vanished in 2001, found in the river, ruled an accident. The list goes on. Each story is a haunting echo of the last. A young man, a bar, a disappearance, a body in the water. And for each one, Gannon and his team allege there is a corresponding smiley face. The city of La Crosse became a flashpoint for the entire controversy. The local police department was forced to publicly and repeatedly defend their accidental rulings. They argued, logically, that the town had thousands of students, a vibrant bar scene, and a large, dark, fast-moving river. These ingredients, they said, were a recipe for tragedy, not conspiracy. They pointed out that smiley face graffiti is ubiquitous. It's one of the most common tags in the world. To link it to these deaths was a fantastic leap, as one official put it. The national media picked up the story. The smiley face killer theory was no longer a fringe idea shared between two detectives. It was on CNN. It was on Good Morning America. And that is when the official, federal-level pushback began. The theory had become too loud, and the FBI decided it was time to silence it. The public fascination with the smiley face theory reached a fever pitch in 2008. Grieving families were demanding answers, and local police departments were being accused of incompetence or, worse, cover-ups. In April 2008, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, took the unusual step of releasing a public statement from its Behavioral Analysis Unit, the same unit famous for profiling serial killers. The statement was blunt and unequivocal. It read, in part, "The FBI has reviewed the information about the victims. None of the information included in the report supported the existence of a serial killer or killers. The vast majority of these incidences appear to be alcohol-related accidental drownings. It went on to address the graffiti directly. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit has concluded that the presence of graffiti
is not indicative of any pattern, nor is it a message from one killer to another. The smiley face is a prevalent graffiti tag, and its presence is a coincidence. This was a kill shot. The highest law enforcement body in the country had looked at the theory and declared it, essentially, nonsense, a tragic fantasy. The FBI statement gave local police departments all the cover they needed. From then on, any reporter or family member who brought up the theory could be dismissed with a simple line: "The FBI looked at it, there's nothing there." The skeptics case, which the FBI championed, is built on three main pillars, and to find the truth, we must analyze them fairly. Pillar number 1: the simple, tragic power of alcohol. The skeptics argue that Gannon and the families are underestimating the danger of alcohol. The victims, almost all of them, were known to be heavily intoxicated. A very high blood alcohol content doesn't just make you stumble. It causes disorientation, confusion, and hypothermia, which accelerates the confusion. The proximity argument, they say, is flawed. A drunk, disoriented person will not walk in a straight line. They will wander. And in a city like La Crosse or Minneapolis, if you wander long enough, you will eventually find the river. The river, dark and flat, can be mistaken for a field or a road. They don't fall in so much as walk in. Pillar number 2: apophenia. This is a key psychological term. Apophenia is the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns within random data. We are hardwired to find order in chaos. The skeptics, including the Center for Homicide Research, released a detailed rebuttal of the theory. They argued that Gannon was a victim of apophenia. He started with a conclusion that these deaths were murders and then worked backward, finding evidence to fit it. What about the graffiti? The Center for Homicide Research plotted the locations of all smiley face graffiti in these cities and found it's everywhere. It's on bridges, on trains, on buildings, on dumpsters. If you look for a smiley face, you will find one. To link the one on the bridge to the body under the bridge is, they say, a classic example of confirmation bias. Pillar number 3: the missing evidence. If this is a vast, nationwide conspiracy of killers, where is the other evidence? Where are the witnesses? Where are the former members confessing? How could a group this large, this prolific, operate for decades without a single leak? There are no fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance footage of abductions, no weapons. For the skeptics and the FBI, the case is simple. The smiley face killer theory is a compelling story, but it's a story built on grief, coincidence, and a fundamental misunderstanding of statistics. The real killer, they say, is alcohol. Case closed. But Kevin Gannon was not deterred. He had a rebuttal for every single point. To the FBI statement, Gannon said, "They never spoke to me. They never reviewed my files. They never spoke to the families. They looked at a summary from local police, the same police who ruled them accidents, and rubber-stamped it. That is not an investigation." To the skeptics' pillars, his arguments were forensic. First, on the alcohol, Gannon agreed. The victims were drunk. But he argued the alcohol was a tool. It made them soft targets for abduction. It also provided the perfect cover for the accidental ruling afterward. It was the perfect weapon. Second, on the bodies. This is Gannon's strongest point. The accidental theory relies on them falling in the night they disappeared, but the forensic evidence, in many cases, contradicts this. He points to Chris Jenkins, whose body was preserved for 4 months. He points to other victims found in jeans, but with no river rash or drag marks on their skin, which should have been present if a body was rolling along a riverbed for weeks. Most importantly, he points to the autopsies that show no water in the lungs. You cannot accidentally drown without inhaling water in a panic.
The lack of it, Gannon argues, proves they were dead before they were put in the water. This is strangulation, or dry drowning, not an accident. And third, the graffiti. Gannon scoffs at the apophenia argument. It's not just a smiley face, he argues. It's the specificity. It's the size, the color. It's the placement, always in a cryptic, taunting location overlooking the body. It's the other symbols with it, the horns, the sins, the specific tags that are repeated. He claims to have found the same smiley face tag painted by the same hand in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and in East Lansing, Michigan, near another drowning. This, he says, is proof of a traveling killer. The FBI said there was no pattern. Gannon said they weren't looking hard enough. The truth, it seemed, depended entirely on who you believed. And just as the debate was raging, just as the Oxygen Network was greenlighting a documentary series about Gannon's hunt, a new case emerged. A case in Pittsburgh. A case that would provide the most explosive and controversial piece of forensic evidence in the history of the theory. The 2018 Oxygen documentary series, Smiley Face Killers: The Hunt for Justice, brought Gannon and Duarte's quest to a new generation. The show followed them as they reinvestigated modern cases using new technology and their decades of experience. The show was a ratings hit. It was also highly controversial, with critics accusing it of exploiting families' grief and presenting coincidence as fact. But it focused the world's attention on a case that, for Gannon, changed everything. Case File 05, Dakota James, 2017. January 25, 2017. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Dakota James, 23, is a graduate student. He's out with friends in downtown Pittsburgh. He's last seen on surveillance footage walking through a cultural district, alone, around 11:30 p.m. He is reported missing. The search begins. His parents, Jeff and Pam, create a Find Dakota Facebook page. The city is mobilized. 40 days later, on March 6, 2017, his body is found in the Ohio River, 10 miles from where he was last seen. The Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office conducts an autopsy. The findings? No signs of foul play. No significant trauma. The cause of death is ruled an accidental drowning. It is the classic, tragic, and all too familiar story. But Dakota's parents, Jeff and Pam, do not accept it. They contact Kevin Gannon and his team. Gannon, Duarte, and a forensic pathologist named Dr. Cyril Wecht, famous for his work on the JFK assassination, agree to take the case. The James family makes a difficult and expensive decision. They have their son's body exhumed for a second, independent autopsy. What Dr. Wecht finds is an explosion. In my opinion, Dr. Wecht states on the documentary, this is not an accidental drowning. He points to one definitive piece of evidence. Around Dakota's neck, deep in the tissue and missed by the original autopsy, he finds ligature marks. The photos are shown. The pattern is clear. The finding, Dr. Wecht concludes, is classic, textbook, evidence of strangulation. This is the smoking gun Gannon has been looking for 20 years. This is not a theory. This is not a pattern. This is a world-renowned pathologist stating, on the record, that a victim who was ruled an accidental drowning was, in fact, strangled to death. If Dakota James was strangled, it means he was murdered. It means his body was placed in the river. It means the entire accidental ruling was wrong. And if it was wrong in this case, how many other cases was it wrong in? The Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office fires back. They call Dr. Wecht's findings indefensible. They claim the ligature marks are nothing more than natural post-mortem artifacts, the way the body's skin and tissues settled and decompose. They stand by their ruling. It becomes a war of experts. But for the public, the damage is done. The image of those marks is impossible to unsee. And the final detail? The one that seals it for Gannon? The team, of course, visits the area. And on a bridge, directly above where Dakota's body was recovered, a large, unmissable, spray-painted smiley face. The case of Dakota James remains, officially, an accidental drowning. But for his family, and for Gannon, it is the case that proves the truth. The killers, Gannon alleges, are getting sloppy, or perhaps just more arrogant. But the Dakota James case highlighted the method of the murder. Another case, years earlier, highlighted what Gannon believes is the logistics of the group. Case File 06, William Hurley, 2009. October 8, 2009, Boston, Massachusetts. William Will Hurley, 24, is a Navy veteran. He's at a Boston Bruins hockey game at the TD Garden. He gets separated from his friends. He calls his girlfriend, telling her he's lost and his phone is dying. He is never heard from again. 6 days later, his body is pulled from the Charles River. The official ruling? Accidental drowning. Police theorize he walked out of the garden, got disoriented, and fell into the nearby river. It fits the pattern perfectly, but there is one detail, one piece of data that makes the accidental theory completely impossible: his cell phone. The last call to his girlfriend pinged a cell tower near the TD Garden, but police, tracking his phone, find something baffling. Several hours after his last call, his phone appears to travel. It pings a tower on the top of Beacon Hill, miles away from the river. And then it pings another tower, even further away. And the phone itself? It is eventually found. Not in the river, not on Will Hurley's Wadi. It is found on a different bridge, the Longfellow Bridge, by a random passerby days after Will vanished. This is not a theory. This is data. A man who accidentally falls in the river cannot also have his phone travel across the city and be deposited on a different bridge. This, Gannon argues, is the proof of logistics. This is what it looks like when a team is at work. Will Hurley, he alleges, was abducted from the garden. He was transported in a vehicle, which explains the phone pings. He was murdered. His body was dumped in the river from one location, and his phone was discarded in another, perhaps as a mistake, or perhaps as another calculated taunt. The official ruling on William Hurley's death has never been changed. It remains an accident, a statistical impossibility, brushed aside. So we are left with two completely irreconcilable versions of the truth. The first is the official truth, the one held by the FBI and law enforcement across the country. This is a story of tragic coincidence. It's a story about the dangers of alcohol, the prevalence of graffiti, and the desperate human need to find patterns in chaos. The men we've discussed tonight are victims, not of a cabal of killers, but of gravity, disorientation, and cold water. Their deaths are a sad but understandable statistical cluster. The second is the detective's truth, the one held by Kevin Gannon, Anthony Duarte, and the families of the dead. This is a story of a horrifying, decades-long conspiracy. It's a story about a network of sophisticated, sadistic killers who have been preying on America's brightest young men. They operate in plain sight, protected by the very accidental rulings that are meant to close the cases. They are, Gannon believes, the most prolific serial killers in American history. The truth is that the pattern of death is undeniably real. Young men are dying in our nation's rivers in numbers that are hard to ignore. The cause of that pattern is what remains a terrifying, unsolved mystery. The FBI's 2008 memo effectively shut down any official multi-agency investigation. With that, the cases were sealed, filed away as accidents. Kevin Gannon is now in his 70s. He has spent over 25 years and much of his own money chasing these shadows, working for free, fueled by a single-minded, obsessive pursuit of what he believes is justice. Is he a hero? A relentless advocate for families ignored by the system? Or is he a victim of his own apophenia, a man who has connected random dots into a terrifying but ultimately imaginary picture? In 2020, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, the River of Death, the city finally installed high-tech surveillance cameras and safety fences along the most dangerous stretches of the riverfront. The accidental drownings, they say, have stopped. Was it the fences, or did the killers simply move on knowing they were being watched? The smiley face remains one of the most common symbols in the world. We use it in texts, on social media, on t-shirts. A simple, happy, harmless gesture. But for the families of Patrick McNeil, Chris Jenkins, Luke Homan, Dakota James, and hundreds of others, that simple circle and smile has become a symbol of something else. It is the symbol of a question that has consumed their lives. It is a symbol of the official indifference they faced. And it is, perhaps, the final, chilling signature of a killer or killers who are still out there, watching and waiting. In the history of American criminology, one name stands as a monument to failure. It is not the name of an affected individual or a detective. It is the name of a figure we never identified. A ghost who instilled fear in a city, claimed responsibility for 37 incidents in his own letters, and then vanished, leaving behind a game so complex, so frightening, that we are still analyzing it over 50 years later. He did not just commit dark deeds, he created a myth. He built it from the tragic ends of the young and the innocent, and he cemented it with ink, paper, and a series of cryptic puzzles that became his true, dark legacy. He is known only by his chosen symbol. And this is the story of his ultimate game. We are not just investigating the incidents. We are investigating the mind behind them, told through the 5 chilling mysteries of his ciphers. From the codes we solved to the one we may never solve. This is Chilling Mysteries of the Ciphers. Mystery number 1, the debut and the 408 cipher. Our story begins in the dark. December 20th, 1968. Lake Herman Road, a desolate, unlit lover's lane in Benicia, California. 2 high school students were on their first real date. They parked. In the darkness, another car pulled up beside them. A man stepped out. Within minutes, the young man was hit by a projectile. The young woman was hit 5 times as she tried to flee. It was a harsh, senseless, and efficient act. The local police were baffled. There was no motive, no suspects. The case went cold almost instantly. For 7 months, there was silence. The attacker was patient. He was waiting. Then, July 4th, 1969, another lover's lane, Blue Rock Springs, Vallejo. A young woman and a young man were sitting in their car. Another car pulled up. The driver got out, shined a high-powered flashlight into their eyes, and opened fire. The woman was hit multiple times and did not survive. The young man was hit in the face, neck, and chest, but miraculously, he survived. The attacker drove away. But this time, he wasn't silent. At 12:40 a.m., a phone rang at the Vallejo Police Department. A dispatcher picked up. A strange, monotone voice began to speak. It was slow, deliberate, as if being read from a script. The caller stated that he wished to report a double incident. He gave the location, 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, where the dispatcher would find kids in a brown car. He noted they were affected by a 9mm item. He then added a chilling sentence, that he had also taken care of the 2 kids from the previous year. He then said, "Goodbye." In that one sentence, the figure linked the 2 crimes. He transformed 2 isolated tragedies into a campaign of fear. But he was just getting started. On August 1st, 1969, the game truly began. 3 identical envelopes, each marked with a strange cross-circle symbol, arrived at the offices of the San Francisco Chronicle, the Vallejo Times-Herald, and the San Francisco Examiner. Inside each was a third of a 408-character cipher and a letter. The letters were handwritten, almost childish, full of spelling errors. But the message was one of ultimate arrogance. This was the first time the world heard the written thoughts of this figure. In the letters, he claimed responsibility for both incidents. To prove this, he described specific details only the police and the perpetrator would know. He mentioned the patterned slacks worn by the young woman at Lake Herman Road and the white blouse worn by the young woman at Blue Rock Springs. The details were correct, but it was the second part of the letter that changed everything. It was an ultimatum, a demand. The author stated he was sending a cipher, which, he claimed, contained his identity. He demanded that the newspapers print this cipher on their front page. He warned that if they did not comply by that Friday afternoon, he would go on a spree that night and ensure that 12 people would have their stories end over the weekend. The newspapers were faced with an impossible choice. Were they dealing with a lunatic or a genuine threat? They chose to comply. On August 2nd, the front pages of 3 papers displayed the bizarre 408-character grid. A wave of code breakers descended upon the cipher. The FBI's cryptanalysis unit in Washington was stumped. The NSA's experts were baffled. The code was a homophonic substitution cipher, meaning one letter could be represented by multiple different symbols. It was complex, designed by an intelligent, if twisted, mind. The Bay Area held its breath. The figure's deadline passed. He did not go on his spree. He was bluffing. Or perhaps he was just enjoying the panic. For a week, the cipher remained an unsolvable mystery. The figure's identity remained locked inside. And then, a breakthrough. It didn't come from the FBI or the NSA. It came from a high school teacher in Salinas, California. He and his wife were sitting at their breakfast table poring over the newspaper. They were amateur code breakers, but they had a key insight. They assumed the author, being arrogant, would start his message with the word I. They tested the theory. I like this. The symbols begin to fall into place. Working for nearly 20 hours with coffee and graph paper, this couple did what the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world could not. They unlocked the figure's mind. On August 8, 1969, the solved cipher was published. The world finally read the manifesto, and it was chilling. The message began with the statement that the author liked his actions because it is so much fun. He wrote that it was more fun than hunting wild game in the forest, because, in his view, man is the most dangerous animal of all. He wrote that these actions gave him a thrilling experience. He then explained his core belief, that when his story ended, he would be reborn in paradise, misspelled, and that all the individuals he had influenced would become his slaves. He concluded by stating he would not give his name, because the public would try to slow down or stop his collecting of slaves for his afterlife. There it was. No complex motive, no political agenda, just the raw, primal satisfaction of the act. The couple's solution was a triumph, but it was also a deep disappointment. The figure had lied. His identity was not in the cipher. He had just played his first move, and he had played it perfectly. He had proven he was smarter than the police, smarter than the FBI. He had held a city hostage. He had turned the press into his personal megaphone. And he had given himself a name. In a letter sent just days before, he began with a new, chilling salutation, stating, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The ghost now had a name. The Z408 had introduced his philosophy, but the game was just beginning. His next cipher would not be a manifesto. It would be a taunt, a 340-character riddle that would obsess and frustrate the world for more than 51 years. Mystery number 2, the escalation and the 340 cipher. The Z408 cipher turned this figure into a media sensation, and he loved it. He was addicted to the attention. He was about to escalate, to prove that his cruel nature was not limited to the darkness and a device. September 27, 1969, Lake Berryessa. It was a beautiful, sunny afternoon. 2 college students were relaxing on a secluded peninsula. They saw a man approaching from the trees. He was heavyset, wearing a strange, dark, hooded costume. The cross-circle symbol, the figure symbol, was sewn onto the chest. He was holding an item. He told them he was an escaped convict from Montana, that he had been involved in an incident with a guard, and he needed their car and money to get to Mexico. The young man, trying to stay calm, offered him everything, but the man didn't want money. He had them tie themselves up. Then he pulled out a long, sharp instrument. The young man, who survived, described the moments that followed. He said the man just started to use the instrument, and he couldn't believe it was happening. He knew his story was about to end. The man struck the young man 6 times in the back. He struck the young woman 10 times. He then walked calmly back to the young man's car. With a black marker, he drew the cross-circle symbol on the door and wrote underneath it, Vallejo, 12-20-68, 7-4-69, Sept 27-69, 6:30. Buy sharp instrument. He was keeping score. He drove back to the main road, finds a payphone, and called the Napa Police Department. The caller stated he wanted to report a terrible incident, specifically a double incident. He gave the location, 2 miles north of park headquarters, and described the white Volkswagen Karmann Ghia. He ended the call by saying, "I'm the one that did it." The young woman's story would end 2 days later. The young man, his lungs punctured, would miraculously survive to tell the tale. The Zodiac was now a daytime attacker. He was brazen, theatrical, and frightening. 2 weeks later, he proved he could strike anywhere. October 11, 1969, San Francisco. Presidio Heights, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. A taxi driver picked up a fare. At the corner of Washington and Cherry, the passenger had him stop. The passenger then used a device. The taxi driver did not survive. As the driver slumped over, the attacker got out, walked around to the driver's side, and was seen by 3 teenagers across the street, wiping down the car. He calmly tore a large piece from the taxi driver's shirt. Then he walked away, melting into the mansions of Presidio Heights. The police dispatch call, in one of the most infamous blunders in police history, mistakenly reported the suspect as a black man. A patrol car, just blocks away, passed a heavy-set white man walking calmly. They didn't stop him. They were looking for someone else. It was almost certainly the Zodiac. He had just ended a man's life and then walked right past the police, untouchable. Days later, a letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle. Inside was the proof, a stained 1-inch square of the driver's shirt. The letter was a masterpiece of taunting. In it, the author again identified himself as the figure responsible, this time for the taxi driver. He provided the piece of shirt as proof. He stated he was the same man who did the fun thing at Lake Berryessa. He boasted that the police would never catch me because he had been too clever for them. He also included a new threat. He was angry that the police said his bus device was a phony. He wrote that he had a new plan to set off a bus device. He added that he would pick off the kiddies as they came out. This threat against children sent San Francisco into a full-blown panic. Police motorcades were assigned to follow school buses. The Zodiac, with a single stamp, had brought a major American city to its knees. He was at the absolute peak of his campaign of fear. and it is at this moment that he decided to send his masterpiece. On November 8, 1969, a new letter arrives. It contained a greeting card and a new, far more complex cipher. This one was 340 characters. It was a dense, chaotic block of symbols, many of them new. It was not neat like the 408. It was frantic and, as it would turn out, intentionally deceptive. This, the Z340, would become his greatest legacy. The couple who solved the 408 looked at it and were baffled. The FBI, the NSA, the CIA, they all threw their best minds at it. Nothing. The Zodiac sent more letters, more taunts. He asked, "Have you cracked the last cipher I sent you?" He was enjoying the game. He had given them an unsolvable puzzle. And for decades, he was right. The Z340 became the holy grail of cryptography. A dark, digital cottage industry sprang up online. Thousands of amateurs and academics dedicated their lives to these 340 symbols. Theories flew. Was it a key cipher requiring a book? Was it written in multiple languages? Was it, as many suspected, complete and utter gibberish? A final message from the figure? The years passed. 1970, 1980, 1990. The case went cold. The letters stopped. The Zodiac disappeared. But the Z340 remained, a digital ghost haunting the internet. The detectives who worked the case grew old, and their stories ended. The prime suspect passed away. The mystery endured. Until 2020, 51 years after the cipher was mailed. A team of 3 amateur codebreakers scattered across the globe finally broke it. An American software developer, a Belgian warehouse operator, and an Australian mathematician. They were not government agents. They were just 3 obsessive, brilliant, and dedicated men who refused to let the puzzle go. They didn't have a Rosetta Stone moment. It was a grinding, agonizing process of trial and error. They used a custom-made piece of decryption software. They ran thousands of potential solutions. Their key insight? The Zodiac wasn't writing left to right. He was intentionally deceptive. The solution, they discovered, was to read the symbols in a diagonal knight's move pattern, a pattern from chess. He was playing a game. In December 2020, the American developer plugged in a new theory. He read the symbols, skipping one, going down 2, then diagonally. The machine spit out fragments. Fun. Trying. Catch me. His heart pounded. He reran the program, and the full message emerged from the 51-year-old static. They sent their solution to the FBI. The FBI, for the first time, confirmed a public solution. They stated it was legitimate and the work of a private team, not the FBI. The world finally read the Z340. The message began with the author hoping people were having lots of fun in trying to catch me. He then referenced a recent TV show where an imposter had called in, stating, "That wasn't me on the TV show." He continued, writing that he was not afraid of the consequences because it would send me to paradise, misspelled again, all the sooner. He reiterated his belief that he had enough slaves to work for him, while everyone else has nothing when they reach the afterlife, which is why they are afraid of the end. He, however, was not afraid because he knew his new life would be an easy one. The 51-year-old mystery was solved. But just like the 408, it was a disappointment. It did not contain his name. It contained no clues. It was not a confession. It was just a taunt, a 51-year-old message from beyond the grave. The Z340 was his masterpiece, but it wasn't his last word. The most tantalizing, and perhaps most tragic, mysteries he left behind were the ones that remain, to this day, unsolved. Mystery number 3, the unsolved codes. The solving of the Z340 in 2020 was a monumental victory, but it also cast a dark shadow. If it took 51 years and supercomputers to crack a 340-character code, what hope was there for the others? The others are the fragments. The short, cryptic, and deeply personal codes that the Zodiac left behind. The ones that, unlike the 408 and 340, might actually contain the one thing he promised, his name. We begin with the most famous and most frustrating of all, the Z13, or the My Name Is cipher. On April 20th, 1970, the Zodiac sent a new letter. He expressed anger that police weren't wearing his Zodiac buttons, a bizarre demand he had made. He was rambling, but then, at the bottom of the letter, he gave the world the one thing it's always wanted. He wrote, P.S. I am not happy. I am going to torment all 13 of my slaves that I have in paradise. The next time you hear from me will be, My name is, and then a 13-character cipher, AENAMEL, and a string of 6 other complex symbols. That was it. My name is. This was it. This had to be it. This, for 50 years, has been the true Holy Grail. If the 408 was his philosophy and the 340 was his ego, the Z13 was his identity. But it is unsolved, and it may be unsolvable. The problem is its length. In cryptography, length is strength. A 408-character cipher has enough repeating patterns to find a solution. A 13-character cipher is a statistical nightmare. There are simply not enough symbols to find a pattern. But that hasn't stopped thousands from trying. The theories are endless. Is it a simple substitution? A common suspect's name from the time has 18 letters. It doesn't fit. Is it an anagram? The first 8 letters are A and Amel. A name, Lel? L-A name? What about the other symbols? Some theories are absurd, suggesting the name of a high-profile politician. Another, more grounded theory suggests the letters A-E-N-A-M-E are just that, a name. Or maybe the name is simply a name, and the figure is mocking us. The sad, cold truth is that Z13 is too short. It's a lock with 13 pins and a trillion possible keys. It is a taunt masquerading as a clue. And it's not the only one he left behind. 3 months later, on June 26, 1970, he sent another, the Map Cipher, or Z32. The letter was a rant. He claimed he was rather unhappy to see people parading around in his Zodiac buttons. He included a road map of the San Francisco Bay Area, with the cross-circle symbol placed squarely on top of Mount Diablo, a 3,800-foot peak that dominates the region. He wrote that he would find a good place to hide his bus device. He claimed, the map is a cipher. The cipher is this. And he gave a new 32-character cipher. He then gave a clue on how to read the map. The clue stated, O is to be set to Mag. N, 0, is to be set to the top of Mount Diablo. This, he claimed, was the key to finding his hidden device. The police, understandably, took this seriously. A device hidden somewhere that could harm children. But the clue was gibberish. Set 0 to the top of Mount Diablo. What did that mean? Is 0 a starting point? Was he talking about radians? Magnetic north? For decades, people have tried to overlay this radian theory onto the map. They draw lines, starting from Mount Diablo, at angles corresponding to the cipher. The lines point to nothing. A random street, a house in San Francisco, a lake. One theory suggests the map points to a specific school, and the device was a threat, not a real object. But the Z32, like the Z13, suffers from being too short. And there is a more sinister possibility. What if they are nothing? What if the Z13 and Z32 are just random symbols? What if the Zodiac, after seeing the 408 cracked in a week, got smarter? He realized that the promise of a solution was more frightening than the solution itself. He realized that an unsolvable puzzle would haunt us forever. He would give us the My Name cipher, knowing we could never, ever solve it. It is, perhaps, his cruelest and most brilliant move. The unsolved codes are his true legacy. They are a monument to his arrogance and to our enduring, tragic, and unfulfilled obsession with finding a name for the boogeyman. And that obsession, a 50-year quest for a name, leads us to one man. A man who, for many, was the only man who ever fit the profile. Mystery number 4, the prime suspect. The Zodiac's letters stopped in 1974. He sent over 20 of them. He claimed responsibility for 37 incidents. He taunted, he threatened, he boasted, and then he went silent. The why did he stop, is one of the case's biggest mysteries. Did his story end? Was he arrested for another crime? Or did he simply get bored and retire, knowing he had won? But as the letters stopped, the hunt for the man behind them was just beginning. And that hunt, for decades, centered almost exclusively on one name. He is the boogeyman in waiting. The man who, for the Chronicle cartoonist who wrote the book Zodiac, and for the detectives who hunted him, was the only man. The case against this prime suspect was staggering. It was a mountain of circumstantial evidence so high it was hard to see the top. Let's look at the man. He was a former schoolteacher, let go for inappropriate contact with students. He was an outcast, intelligent but deeply disturbed. He was in the exact locations at the exact times. He was at Lake Herman Road. He was a scuba diver who frequented Lake Berryessa. He lived in Vallejo and worked in San Francisco near the taxi driver incident. He owned a Zodiac brand wristwatch. His favorite book, he told friends, was The Most Dangerous Game, the exact story the Zodiac referenced in his 408 cipher. A friend of his told police that in 1969, the suspect had a disturbing conversation with him. This friend claimed the suspect told him he had a new idea for a story. He wanted to hunt humans with a device and a sharp object. He said he would send taunting letters to the police. He said he would sign them the Zodiac. He said he would make a bus device to harm children. He said he would attach a flashlight to his device to see in the dark. The friend, at the time, thought it was just dark, twisted talk. But after the incident started, he went to the police. This seemed like a smoking gun. The police certainly thought so. They descended on this prime suspect. They interviewed him. He was evasive but clever. He had an excuse for everything. That Zodiac conversation? Oh, that was just bar talk, he said. The watch? It was a gift. Police searched his trailer. They found items. They found sharp instruments. They found disturbing items in his freezer. They found a man who was clearly, deeply disturbed. But they did not find a smoking gun. They found no hood, no cipher keys. And this is where the mountain of evidence began to crumble. This is the great, frustrating mystery of this prime suspect. For every piece of evidence against him, there was a piece of evidence that exonerated him. The police had his fingerprints. They had been all over his trailer. None of them, none, matched the prints the Zodiac left on the taxi. Not one. They had his handwriting. They got multiple samples. The top handwriting experts in the country looked at them. Their conclusion? It was not a match. The Zodiac's handwriting was neat, with a distinctive loop on the D. The suspect's was sloppy. But what if he was disguising his handwriting, the detectives asked. The experts said he would have to be the greatest handwriting expert in the world to be this consistent for this long. And then, decades later, the final fatal blow to the theory, DNA. In the 2000s, police were able to get a partial DNA profile from the saliva on the stamps and envelopes of the Zodiac's letters. They got a warrant. They tested the prime suspect's DNA. He had since passed in 1992. The result? No match. It was not him. The man who, for 30 years, was the face of the Zodiac, was not the Zodiac. The case against him, as compelling as it was a house of cards. A coincidence. The prime suspect was not the figure. So, we are back to nothing. A ghost. A man with no face and no name. The case went cold, stone cold, for another 20 years. It seemed, as the 21st century dawned, that the Zodiac had truly won. He had beaten the police, the detectives, the DNA. His final mystery, his identity, would remain locked forever. Or would it? Because in 2021, a new group emerged. A group of private investigators, ex-cops, and journalists. They called themselves the Case Breakers, and they claimed they had a new name. Mystery number 5, the unsolved legacy. The Zodiac case is more than a cold case. It is a cultural obsession. It is the grandfather of all true crime. The 2007 film by a famous director brought the dark, obsessive, ink-stained world of the investigation to a new generation. It painted a portrait of a case that wasn't just a mystery, but a disease. An obsession that consumed the men who hunted him, like the cartoonist and the lead inspector. The film ends with no answers. Because that is the truth. There are no answers. The case remains, to this day, officially open and unsolved in 3 different counties. But that is not what you will read on the internet. In October 2021, a group of 40-plus independent investigators called the Case Breakers made a stunning announcement. They held a press conference. They claimed with 100% certainty that they had identified the Zodiac. His name, they said, was a man who had passed in 2018. Who? A house painter, an Air Force veteran. The Case Breakers laid out their evidence. It was compelling and familiar. This new suspect lived in the area. He had a dark side. But their smoking gun was twofold. First, a series of photos of the man showing scars on his forehead that, they claimed, perfectly matched the police sketch of the figure from the taxi incident. Second, a cipher. They claimed that if you removed the letters of this man's full name from the Z340 cipher, the remaining letters formed a new secret message. This is, to be blunt, not how ciphers work. This is apophenia. This is seeing a pattern in the static because you want to. The press, for a day, ran with the story. Zodiac identified, the headline screamed. And then the pushback. The FBI, the San Francisco police, the Vallejo police, they all, in a rare moment of unity, released statements. They said this was not a new suspect. They said the case against this man was circumstantial. And they reiterated, the Zodiac case is, and remains, open. The new theory was just that. A theory. A good one, perhaps. But it was not proof. It was another prime suspect. A collection of compelling coincidences that fell apart under scrutiny. The DNA did not match. The fingerprints did not match. The handwriting did not match. And so we are left where we began, in the dark, with a ghost. The Zodiac's true victory is not that he affected 5 or 7 or 37 lives. His victory is that he created a puzzle that we, as a society, cannot put down. He weaponized our own need for answers, our own obsession with order, against us. He knew that a random, senseless act is a tragedy, but an act with a puzzle is a legend. He knew the 408 would be solved and would introduce his brand. He knew the 340 would be a 50-year obsession. And he knew that the My Name Is cipher would be the cruelest, most perfect, and final joke of all. A 13-symbol lock thrown into the ocean
that he knew we would dive for forever. The mystery is not who was the Zodiac. The mystery is the ciphers themselves. He is not a man. He is a question. And he is a question that, most likely, will never, ever be answered. Los Angeles, 1947. It's the city of dreams, the bright, sun-baked factory of American fantasy, a place where anyone could reinvent themselves, where starry-eyed young women and ambitious men flocked to see their names in lights. But beneath this shimmering veneer of Hollywood glamour, 1940s Los Angeles was a dark, cynical, and often corrupt city, a place of shadows, secrets, and ambitions that could turn dangerous. And in January of that year, a discovery would be made in a vacant lot that would rip that veneer apart. It would expose the dark heart of the city, baffling police, feeding a media frenzy, and creating a mystery so profound, so disturbing, that it remains unsolved to this day. This is the story of America's most infamous cold case, a case that has fascinated and horrified the public for over 75 years. But this is not just a story about the crime itself. This is an investigation into the failure to solve it. This is why the case of the Black Dahlia is still unsolved. Before she was a mystery, she was a 22-year-old woman from the East Coast. Like countless others, she had come to California chasing a dream of stardom that never materialized. She was a drifter, moving between cheap hotels, acquaintances, and temporary relationships, always on the edge of the glamorous world she so desperately wanted to join. She was beautiful, with striking dark hair, and was often seen in black clothing, a detail the press would later seize upon. But in life, she was largely invisible, just another face in the post-war crowd. On the morning of January 15, 1947, a local resident was walking with her young child through the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. It was a developing suburb, with vacant lots separating new homes. In one of those lots, lying in the damp grass, she saw what she first mistook for a discarded store mannequin. It was not a mannequin. What she had found was the young woman. But the scene was unlike anything even the most hardened police officers had ever encountered. The 22-year-old was no longer in one piece. Her body had been surgically divided at the waist, and all the blood had been drained from it. This was not a fit of rage. This was a methodical, clinical procedure. Her body had been posed. Her arms were raised above her head, her legs spread, and her face. Her face had been altered with precise cuts, creating a grotesque, permanent smile. But the most crucial detail was this: there was no blood at the scene, not a single drop. This meant the entire horrific procedure had happened somewhere else. The perpetrator had then taken the time to transport the pieces and deliberately arrange them in this vacant lot for the world to find. The police were called, and the press was right behind them. The scene was immediately contaminated by reporters and onlookers, trampling over potential evidence. The young woman, who was invisible in life, was about to become the most famous person in America. The press, remembering a recent film noir, The Blue Dahlia, and noting her dark hair and clothing, gave her a nickname. They called her the Black Dahlia. And in that moment, the 22-year-old woman from Massachusetts ceased to exist. She was replaced by a two-word headline, a chilling caricature. The investigation was no longer about finding who was responsible for her end. It was about selling newspapers. And this, as we will see, is the very first reason why this case was never solved. Reason 1. The media circus. Why is the case unsolved? Because the investigation was compromised before it even began. The culprit was the Los Angeles media. In 1947, Los Angeles was home to a dozen daily newspapers, all locked in a ferocious circulation war. The Los Angeles Examiner, owned by the infamous William Randolph Hearst, was known for its sensational yellow journalism.
Its rival, the Los Angeles Times, was desperate to keep up. This case was not a tragedy to them, it was a gift. It was a story that had everything: a beautiful young woman, a Hollywood dream, and a shocking, mysterious end. The crime scene itself was a circus. Reporters were on site, sometimes arriving before senior detectives, taking photos and even picking up potential evidence. The police, far from stopping them, actively participated. In the 1940s, it was common practice for detectives to have favorite reporters. They would leak exclusive details to their chosen journalist in exchange for favorable coverage. This meant the investigation was not happening behind closed doors. It was being conducted on the front pages. The Examiner was the most aggressive. They identified the young woman before the police had even confirmed it. They did this by contacting her mother in Massachusetts under the guise that her daughter had won a beauty contest. Only after getting all the personal details and stories about her life did the reporter break the news that her daughter was gone. The press then printed sensational and often entirely fabricated stories. They portrayed her as a femme fatale, an adventuress who prowled Hollywood and tempted men. They painted a picture of a woman who, in their words, was asking for a dark fate. This narrative did two things. It sold papers, and it completely contaminated the jury pool and the investigation. The police were no longer just looking for a perpetrator. They were chasing a fictional character, a vamp created by the media. But the media's most egregious act was yet to come. About a week after the discovery, the editor of the Examiner received a phone call. The man on the line claimed to be the perpetrator. He said he was sorry for what he'd done and that he would be turning himself in. He was, he said, writing a letter and would mail other items to prove it was him. Then he mailed a package. It was addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other newspapers. Inside was a collection of the young woman's personal belongings: her birth certificate, social security card, old photographs, and an address book. The package had been meticulously cleaned with gasoline, erasing all fingerprints. The Examiner received the package, and they did not immediately give it to the police. They held on to it, analyzing it for their own story. When they finally did turn it over, the items had been handled by multiple reporters. Any potential forensic value was gone. This was the dynamic. The perpetrator wasn't playing a game with the police. He was playing a game with the press. He was using them as his megaphone. The LAPD was left chasing shadows, reading about their own case in the morning paper like everyone else. The investigation was doomed from the first 48 hours, a victim of its own fame. Reason 2, the storm of false confessions. Why is the case unsolved? Because the signal was lost in the noise. The investigation was not a surgical hunt for one perpetrator. It was a chaotic attempt to manage a national hysteria. The story was so sensational, so omnipresent, that it triggered a bizarre psychological phenomenon. People began to confess. Not one or two. In the end, over 60 people, mostly men, came forward and claimed responsibility for the act. Each and every one of these confessions had to be taken seriously. Each one required detectives, pulled from the real investigation, to spend hours, days, sometimes weeks, verifying the confessor's story, checking their alibis, and ultimately debunking them. It was a massive, unprecedented drain on resources. Why would so many people confess to a crime they didn't commit? The motives were varied. Some were mentally unstable, people on the fringes of society who had come to believe their own dark fantasies. Others were desperate for a moment of fame, however twisted, wanting their name attached to the biggest story in the country. Some were men in bad relationships who were turned in by jealous partners as a form of revenge. One man, a prime suspect for a short time, had a story so convincing that detectives held him for days. He was eventually released when it was discovered he had a rock-solid alibi. He was on a military base in a different state on the day of the incident. This flood of false information did exactly what the real perpetrator likely intended. It created chaos. It was the original information overload. The police were buried in paperwork. Their desks were piled high with letters from the public, each pointing a finger at a strange neighbor or an angry ex-husband. There were thousands of tips. The real leads, if they ever existed, were buried under this mountain of fiction. The perpetrator, meanwhile, was silent. After mailing the package of personal items, he never made credible contact again. He didn't need to. The public and the press were doing his work for him.
They were muddying the waters, creating diversions, and grinding the gears of the LAPD to a halt. Imagine trying to find one specific person in a stadium where every single person is shouting, "It was me." This was the reality for the detectives. The sheer volume of lies made finding the truth an administrative impossibility. The real perpetrator wasn't just one person, he was, in effect, thousands. Reason 3. The suspects, an abundance of perfect fits. Why is the case unsolved? Because unlike most cold cases that suffer from a lack of suspects, this case suffered from the exact opposite. There were too many perfect suspects. But in an era before modern forensics, perfect was just a feeling, not a fact. Let's look at the list. It's a roster of the city's dark side. The investigation touched dozens of men, from famous Hollywood figures to the lowest drifters. The address book mailed by the perpetrator contained the names of 75 men. The police investigated them all. Many were servicemen, producers, and barflies. Nothing panned out. But a few names rose to the top. Names so compelling, they have haunted the case for 75 years. The doctor theory. The clinical, precise nature of the scene, the clean division of the body, the draining of the blood, screamed medical training. This wasn't a frenzied attack. It was a procedure. This led the police to a very specific and very powerful circle of suspects, Los Angeles doctors. The primary suspect. The most prominent of these theories, one that has gained incredible traction in modern times, centers on a single, powerful, and deeply connected Los Angeles physician. This man was a brilliant surgeon. He was also a man with a dark side, known for his lavish, decadent parties and his connections to the city's surrealist art scene. This theory was not proposed by a random blogger. It was meticulously built, over decades, by the doctor's own son, a man who grew up to become a veteran LAPD homicide detective. This detective, now retired, believes his father was the perpetrator. The evidence he compiled is chilling. He claims his father knew the young woman. He claims his father's medical training matched the incisions perfectly. He claims his father's handwriting matches the notes sent to the press. He also points to his father's friendship with the artist Man Ray, noting the disturbing similarities between the posed body and the surrealist art of the time. But the most damning evidence comes from the LAPD's own files. In 1950, 3 years after the incident, the LAPD was investigating this same doctor for a separate, serious crime. As part of that investigation, they bugged his house. They placed hidden microphones throughout his mansion and listened for weeks. One day, the recordings captured the doctor, alone in his home, speaking to himself. He was heard to say, in effect, that he was getting away with it. And then, the most chilling line of all. The tapes recorded him speculating, "Supposing I did do that. They can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's gone." This secretary was a woman who had, indeed, disappeared. Here, on an LAPD wiretap, was their prime suspect in their biggest unsolved case, all but confessing. So, why wasn't he arrested? The detective's son believes the answer is simple: a cover-up. He believes the 1950s LAPD and the DA's office squashed the case. Why? Because this doctor was too powerful. He knew too much. He was the personal physician to many of the city's elite, including high-ranking police officials. He held their secrets. To arrest him would be to uncork a scandal that could bring down the entire city government. So they let it go. The tapes were filed away. The case remained unsolved. Other perfect suspects. This doctor was not the only one. There was another prominent physician, also with a dark reputation, whose own daughter came forward to accuse him. There was another man, a local bellhop, who became a prime suspect after he was caught sending harassing notes. There was a man who wrote to the police with such intimate, insider knowledge of the case that they detained him for weeks, convinced he was the one, only to discover he had a confirmed alibi. The problem was clear. The LAPD had a dozen perfect suspects, but not a single shred of perfect evidence. Every lead led to a dead end, a contradiction, or a wall of power too high to climb. Reason 4, the systemic failure, the final answer. So we come to the final and most definitive answer to our question. Why, after 75 years, is this case still unsolved? The answer is not a single, simple reason. It is a total systemic failure. The case was not just unsolvable, it was made unsolvable by the very time and place in which it happened. The failure of forensics. We look at this case today through the lens of CSI and DNA. We have to remember, this was 1947. Forensic science, as we know it, did not exist. DNA? It wouldn't be discovered for another 6 years and wouldn't be used in a criminal case for almost 40. Fingerprints? The perpetrator was meticulous. The package he sent was wiped clean. The scene itself was clean. There were no usable prints. Databases? Today, a detective could run a suspect's name through a dozen federal and state databases. In 1947, all they had were cardboard file boxes and the memory of the cop at the next desk. Psychological profiling? The concept of serial offenders was decades away. They weren't hunting a psychological profile, they were just looking for a madman. The 1947 LAPD was an organization built to deal with street brawls and burglaries. It was completely and utterly unequipped to handle a perpetrator this meticulous, intelligent, and brazen. The failure of corruption. And then there is the darkest possibility, the one that answers the question with a chilling finality. What if the case wasn't just unsolved? What if it was unsolved? The 1940s LAPD was notoriously corrupt. This is not a modern theory, it is a historical fact. The department was awash in graft, bribes, and cover-ups. It was an organization that often protected the rich and powerful at all costs. Look at the evidence again. The most promising suspect, the powerful surgeon, is bugged by the LAPD. He makes what sounds like a confession, and the response? Nothing. The case is filed away. Why? Was it, as the doctor's son alleges, a deliberate cover-up? Did the department decide that arresting this man and exposing the secrets he held about the city's elite was a price they were not willing to pay? Did they decide that one drifter, a young woman the press had already painted as a lost cause, was not worth tearing the city apart? We will never know for sure, but this, in the end, is the most likely truth. The case of the Black Dahlia is not unsolved because of a lack of information. It is unsolved because of an avalanche of it. An avalanche of media hype that buried the evidence. An avalanche of false confessions that wasted the time. An avalanche of perfect suspects that led nowhere. And, perhaps, a final, deliberate avalanche of corruption that buried the one true answer forever. The young woman's story is not a whodunit. It is a tragedy. A story of a system that failed, a press that exploited, and a city that chose to look away. The case is cold, not because the trail went cold, but because the trail, in all likelihood, was intentionally set ablaze, leaving nothing behind but smoke, mirrors,
and a 75-year-old question. In the long, crowded history of American cold cases, there are stories that shock, there are stories that confuse, and then there are stories that break the heart. This is a story that does all three. For 65 years, he was a face without a name, a mystery without a solution. He was a symbol of an investigation that had completely failed, and a city that had somehow, impossibly, misplaced a child. He was known to the world only by the container he was found in, or by the haunting title on his gravestone, America's Unknown Child. For more than 6 decades, his case was the ultimate misconception, a mystery so total, so absolute, that it seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. Until it wasn't. In 2022, science finally provided the truth. A truth that was hidden in plain sight, buried not just in the ground, but in the complex, secret history of a family. This is the definitive story of the boy in the box and the 65-year search to give him back his name. Our story begins in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The date is February 25, 1957. It's a cold, gray winter. In the neighborhood of Fox Chase, on the outskirts of the city, lies a patch of undeveloped wooded land. It's a dumping ground, a place where locals discard trash and a quiet spot for hunters. A young college student had been in the area. Days earlier, he had been checking his animal traps when he noticed a large cardboard box in the thicket just off the side of the road. He thought little of it. But days later, on the 25th, he was driving by and felt compelled to stop. He got out of his car, approached the box, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. He immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they secured a scene that was both baffling and deeply tragic. The box was a large rectangular cardboard container. The text on the side indicated it had once held a piece of nursery furniture. Inside, they found a small flannel blanket of a common plaid design, and carefully wrapped within it was a child. The initial assessment was grim. The boy was estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old. He was small for his age, appearing malnourished. His hair had been recently and crudely cut, as clippings were found still clinging to his body. There were signs of past injuries, and the condition of the body suggested a difficult, troubled life. But the most critical and confounding piece of evidence was what wasn't there. There was no sign of a struggle. There were no items at the scene, and there was no identity. The child's fingerprints were taken, but they matched no one. His description was sent to every police department in the country. This created the central, impossible problem of the investigation. How do you solve a case when you don't even know who the person is? The Philadelphia police in 1957 were faced with a ghost. They had a silent victim, a clean scene, and not a single lead. The press dubbed him the boy in the box, and the name stuck. The investigation had begun, but it was already at a complete dead end. The core misconception of the case was that it would be solved quickly. In the 1950s, a child didn't just disappear without a trace. Surely someone would come forward. A parent, an aunt, a neighbor. Someone had to be missing this boy. To that end, the Philadelphia Police Department did something unprecedented. They believed that if the public could just see the child, the case would be cracked. They had the boy prepared. He was dressed in donated clothes, and he was seated in a small chair. A post-mortem photograph was taken. It was a heartbreaking image, showing a boy who looked, for all the world, like he was merely sleeping. This photograph was put on a poster, and the poster was distributed everywhere. 400,000 flyers were sent out. They were put in every post office, every gas station, every police precinct, not just in Philadelphia, but across the country. The photo was printed in newspapers. The plea was simple: do you know this boy? The answer from the public was a deafening, impossible silence. Not one credible lead. Not one person came forward to say, that is my son. That is my nephew. That is the boy from down the street. How could a child live for 4 to 6 years and not be recognized by a single person? This misconception that the boy was a local, known child was the first major failure. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex. But the case did not go cold in the typical sense. It became a fixation, a mission for the officers involved. The original lead investigator was a man who became obsessed. He kept the boy's post-mortem photo on his desk for decades, a daily reminder of his one great failure. When he retired, he passed the voluminous files to his successor, who, in turn, worked the case for the rest of his own career, on his own time, long after he had also retired. This was not just a file in a cabinet, it was a personal quest for 2 generations of detectives. The community, too, felt this collective sense of responsibility. The boy could not remain in a city morgue forever. A local funeral home donated a casket. A local cemetery donated a plot of land. In 1957, America's unknown child was laid to rest. The headstone, paid for by the detectives who hunted for his name, became a symbol. It was a pilgrimage site for the curious, the grieving, and the investigators who, every year, would leave flowers, swearing they would one day replace that haunting title with a real name. For 65 years, that stone remained a monument to the mystery. So, why was it unsolved for so long? Because the void of information, the total lack of a starting point, was filled with theories. These theories, plausible and complex, consumed thousands of hours of investigative work and ultimately led nowhere. This is where the misconception deepens. The investigators, lacking a solid lead, had to chase stories, and these stories took them down winding, frustrating paths. The first major theory, the foster home. This was, for decades, the leading hypothesis. Just over a mile from the discovery site, there was a local foster home. The man who ran it was a known, eccentric character. The home was, by all accounts, a troubled place. Investigators descended on this theory. It made perfect sense. A child who was not reported missing could be a child who was off the books in an institution. They investigated the man who ran the home. They investigated his family. They interviewed, years later, people who had been foster children there, asking if they remembered a boy who matched the description. They checked the man's finances. They checked his purchase records. Did he buy a bassinet like the one the box was for? The answer was yes, he had. This seemed to be the smoking gun. But upon further investigation, the lead dissolved. The purchase was accounted for. The children at the home, while reporting a harsh life, had no memory of the boy. Despite decades of suspicion and the investigators' gut feeling, a concrete link could never be made between the foster home and the child. It was a dead end. The second major theory, the mysterious M. This is perhaps the most bizarre and most time-consuming theory in the entire case. Years after the discovery, a psychologist at a local university was contacted by a woman who we will call M. M told the psychologist a convoluted and deeply disturbing story. She claimed her mother, who was now deceased, had been a cruel and abusive woman. She claimed that her own sister had given birth to an illegitimate child, and that this child, the boy in the box, had been kept in their home. She claimed that one day her mother had taken care of the child, and that she, M, helped dispose of the container. The psychologist, alarmed, contacted the police. The investigators were electrified. This was it. The story had all the elements of a dark, hidden family secret. It explained why no one reported him missing. They began to focus on M. But her story was unstable. She changed details. She seemed, at times, unreliable. Was she telling the truth? Or was she a deeply troubled woman creating a fantasy to explain a famous crime? The police leaned into it. They spent years investigating this lead. They believed that if they just pushed hard enough, the family secret would unravel. The M theory became the dominant narrative for the public and the police for more than 30 years. It was the hearsay, the misconception that everyone believed was the truth. But it too was a dead end. The forensic failure. The real problem was the technology of 1957. There was no DNA, there was no national database. Fingerprinting the boy was a futile act as he had no existing records. All the detectives had was shoe leather detective work, interviews, tips, and hunches. And in this case, every tip, every hunch, every plausible theory evaporated upon inspection. The case went cold, not for lack of effort, but for a total lack of verifiable facts. The case remained frozen in time for almost 40 years. The files grew thicker, but the answers remained absent. Then, in the 1990s, a new technology emerged that would change investigations forever: DNA. In 1998, the case was officially reopened. The original detectives, now old men, along with their younger successors, petitioned for a court order. The boy's remains were exhumed from the cemetery. It was a somber, hopeful moment. Science was being given a chance to solve what human beings could not. From the boy's remains, a tooth was extracted, and from that tooth, a DNA profile was successfully obtained. This was a massive leap forward. The first thing they did? They tested the DNA against the M theory. They tracked down the family of the mysterious woman, M, and obtained DNA samples. The lab compared them. The result? No match. In an instant, the single most dominant, time-consuming, and popular theory of the last 30 years was proven false. The case was back to square one. The DNA profile they obtained in 1998 was mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. This is a type of DNA passed down only from the mother. It was useful for disproving theories, but not broad enough to find a new one. The case went cold again. Another 20 years passed, but science and technology continued to evolve. By 2019, a new revolutionary tool had emerged: forensic genetic genealogy. This was the technique used to identify other long-sought figures in cold cases. It works by using autosomal DNA, the complex profile from both parents, and uploading it to public open-source genealogy databases, where people share their DNA to find relatives. The city of Philadelphia, with private partners and philanthropic funds, decided to try one last time. The boy's remains were exhumed a second time. A new, much better DNA sample was extracted. This new profile was uploaded, and they got a hit. This was the aha moment 65 years in the making. The hit was not a parent or a sibling. It was a distant cousin. Then another, and another. The work of the genetic genealogists then began. This was not a simple database search. It was a monumental feat of historical detective work. They took these distant cousins and they began to build a massive, complex family tree, working backward to find the common ancestors. Once they found that common ancestor from the 19th century, they began to build the tree forward. They identified thousands of descendants. They were looking for one specific branch of that tree, a branch that had family members living in the Philadelphia area in the 1950s. Slowly, meticulously, they narrowed it down. They identified a woman who, based on the DNA, could be the mother. They began to investigate her life. They discovered she had given birth to a boy in 1953. They searched for this boy's records, and they found nothing. No school records, no health records, no social security number. It was a child who was born and who then, on paper, simply ceased to exist. This was their boy. They had a name. They cross-referenced this with the paternal DNA, running a parallel investigation. It all converged. They had found him. In December of 2022, the Philadelphia Police Department held a press conference. The room was packed. This was the moment that generations of detectives had worked for. The misconception, which had stood for 65 years, was about to be corrected. The police commissioner stood at the podium and announced the truth. America's unknown child was unknown no more. He had a name. He was born on January 13, 1953. The heel sigh, the misconception, was that this boy was an orphan or a forgotten child from a distant state. The truth was that he was not. He was a local boy. He was born and raised for his short life in the Philadelphia area. The misconception was that he was unwanted, a child who had slipped through the cracks. The trush was that he had a family, a large, established local family. He had a mother. He had a father, both of whom were from the area, both of whom were now deceased. He had living siblings. In that moment, 65 years of theories were wiped away. It wasn't the foster home. It wasn't the mysterious M. It was a family secret. A secret kept so tightly for so long that an entire city was left to wonder. But the police also made one thing very clear. This is not the end of the case. This is the beginning. For 65 years, the question was, who is the boy in the box? Now the question is, what happened to this specific child? The case is now, for the first time, a full, active investigation. They have a name. They have a family tree. They can now build a real timeline, interview people who knew the family, and look for a real answer. The truth is that the mystery of his identity is solved. The truth is that the mystery of his life and its tragic end is now finally being investigated. In 2023, the cemetery held a service. The old, worn headstone that read, "America's Unknown Child," was removed. A new one was put in its place. It is a beautiful stone. It has the image of a lamb, and for the first time in 65 years, it bears the one thing that was lost for so long. It bears his name. The 65-year misconception is over. The truth, finally, has been recorded.
There is a concept in America known as the dream. It is a dream of success, of family, and of a safe harbor. This dream often takes the shape of a house, a beautiful home on a beautiful street in a perfect, quiet town. This is a story about that dream and what happens when a shadow falls upon it. This is not a story of a classic crime. There are no sirens, no overt acts of aggression. This is a story of a psychological terror, a campaign waged through paper and ink. It is the story of a house, a family, and a mystery that captured the imagination of the entire world. The central question, a secret that remains unsolved to this day, is simple but deeply chilling. Who was the Watcher? Our story begins in 2014 in the town of Westfield, New Jersey. To understand the story, you must first understand the town. Westfield is not just any suburb. It is, by all measures, the pinnacle of the American dream. It is frequently voted one of the safest towns in the entire country. It has sprawling colonial homes, tree-lined streets, and one of the best school systems in the state. It is a place where people move for security, a place where doors are, or at least were, left unlocked. It is the last place on earth you would expect a story like this to happen. In the heart of this town, on a coveted, prestigious street known as the Boulevard, sat a magnificent 6-bedroom Dutch colonial home. It was built in 1905. It had fireplaces, a beautiful sun porch, and a yard perfect for a young family. It was, in every sense, a dream house. In June of 2014, that dream house was purchased by a new family. We will call them the new owners. They were a successful couple from a nearby town, moving up in the world. They had 3 young children, all under the age of 10. They had saved for this moment. This house was the culmination of all their work. The sale closed. The keys were handed over. The family, excited, did not move in immediately. The house was grand, but it was over a century old. They wanted to do some minor renovations, some painting, before bringing their children in. For the first few days, their life was a happy chaos of contractors, painters, and dreams. The husband would work at his new job, and in the evenings, he would go to the empty house to check on the progress and sort the mail. It was on one of these quiet evenings, just 3 days after closing on the house, that he found the first letter. It was in a thick, white, rectangular envelope. It was addressed simply to the new owner. There was no return address. The husband, assuming it was a welcome note from a neighbor, opened it. It was not a welcome note. It was the beginning of a nightmare. The letter was typed, the language stilted and strange. It was a dense block of text, almost filling the page. The author began by welcoming the new family to the house. The author then introduced themselves. They called themselves the Watcher. This Watcher, the letter explained, was not new. The letter claimed that this house, on this specific street, had been the subject of my family for decades. The author claimed their grandfather had observed the house in the 1920s, and their father had done so in the 1960s. And now, the author wrote, it was my time. The author asked if the new family knew the history of the house. The author claimed to know what was within the walls. The letter then became deeply personal and deeply unsettling. The author noted that the house had been busy with contractors. The author had seen the new family. The author asked, "Why are you here? What has brought you to me?" The author's tone then shifted, focusing on the new family's children. The letter noted that the new owners had, in the author's words, brought me the young blood I requested. The author asked if the family had found all the secrets the house held. The letter suggested the family should wait and see what was in the walls. The author asked, "Are you aware of the house's past? Do you know what lies within?" The author wrote that once they knew the family's names, they could call to them and draw them to me. The letter ended with a chilling, open-ended phrase, a single word, welcome, and then a sign-off, typed, the Watcher. The new family was understandably terrified. They immediately called the police. The police, while disturbed, were limited in what they could do. A strange, creepy letter was not, in itself, a crime. It was a disorderly conduct issue at worst. They advised the family to be vigilant and to not tell anyone about the letter, as the author was likely a local and they did not want to tip them off. The family tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a prank, a bad joke from a jealous neighbor who lost a bidding war. They paused the renovations. They stopped bringing their children to the house. 2 weeks later, the second letter arrived. The tone was different. It was more familiar and far more frightening. The first letter was addressed to the new owner. This second letter was addressed to the new owners by their names. The author had misspelled their last name, but it was clear they knew who the family was. This letter was more specific. The author confirmed they had been observing the family. The author mentioned the family's 3 children by name and in their correct birth order. The author even mentioned one of the children by a family nickname, something that was not on any public document. This implied the author was close enough to hear them. The author mentioned seeing the children in the yard, using an easel. The author asked specific, terrifying questions. Will the young blood be in the attic? Or are they too afraid to go up there alone? I, the author wrote, would be very afraid. The author seemed to possess an intimate, impossible knowledge of the house. The letter stated that the house was my job, my life, my obsession. And then a direct reference to the family's fear. The author wrote, I see you have put alarms up, and you have contractors changing the house. You are foolish. It will not stop me." The letter ended with a sense of impatience, as if the author was waiting for the family to move in and was growing angry. The family was no longer just scared. They were in a state of terror. They were being watched by someone who knew their names, their children's names, and their movements. They stopped all renovations. They stopped going to the house entirely. A few weeks later, a third letter arrived. This one was pure, distilled anger. The author was furious that the family had not moved in. The author asked, "Where have you gone? The house is missing you." The author demanded to know why the family had bought the house if they were just going to abuse it by leaving it empty. The author wrote, "The house is crying." This letter contained the most direct, frightening language. The author spoke of what could have been and what would happen. The author wrote about the young blood and how they were waiting for them. The author ended the letter with a final, ominous statement, suggesting that the house itself was a living entity and that the watcher was merely its messenger. This was the end. The family's dream was over. They had purchased a multi-million-dollar home, and they would never spend a single night in it. They were, in effect, the first family in history to be haunted into submission, not by a ghost, but by an anonymous typist. The secret of who this person was now consumed not just the family, but the entire town. The case was no longer a minor annoyance. It was a full-blown criminal investigation. The Westfield Police Department, under a new chief, launched a comprehensive effort. The local prosecutor's office was brought in. They opened a file. The investigation moved in two parallel tracks: the police work and the family's own private efforts. The police did everything by the book. They canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing every single person on the street. They asked, "Did you see anyone at the mailbox? Do you know of anyone with a grudge?" The neighbors were, by all accounts, cooperative. They were as disturbed as anyone. This was their street. The police set up surveillance. They installed cameras aimed at the house, hoping to catch the author in the act of dropping off another letter. But the author went silent. The family, meanwhile, was in a terrible bind. They were paying a mortgage plus property taxes on a house they could not live in and could not sell. Who would buy a house that came with a dedicated stalker? They were trapped. They poured their own money into a private investigation, hiring a team of ex-FBI agents and private security consultants. This private team was even more thorough. They swept the house top to bottom, looking for hidden microphones or bugs. They found nothing. They ran background checks on everyone. Not just the neighbors, but the mail carriers, the contractors, and even the previous owners. This led to the first interesting fact. The previous owners, who had lived in the house for 23 years, also received a letter. Just one, a few days before they moved out. It was also from the watcher. It was a friendly letter, wishing them well on their departure and noting that the author had been observing them for years. The previous owners had thought it was a prank and threw it away. They never told the new family. This was a critical piece of information. It meant the watcher was not just focused on the new family. The watcher was focused on the house. The police focused on the letters themselves. The writing was unique. The phrasing was old-fashioned, almost theatrical. The envelopes were cheap, standard, and untraceable. But then they had their biggest breakthrough. On the envelope of one of the letters, the private lab was able to isolate a small, partial DNA sample. This was it. The case was about to be cracked. The DNA was tested. The results came back. The DNA belonged to a woman. This was a major shift. Everyone had assumed the watcher was male. The police immediately and secretly began a neighborhood sweep. They collected discarded DNA from over a dozen neighbors. They took water bottles left for recycling. They took coffee cups. They tested the female neighbors who lived closest to the house. Every single test came back negative. The DNA was a smoking gun with no one to tie it to. It was not in any criminal database. It matched no one on the street. The investigation, once again, was at a dead end. This brings us to the central secret. If not a stranger, then who? Over the years, the investigation has focused on a small, core group of theories. Each one is plausible. Each one is unproven. Theory number 1, the eccentric neighbors. This theory focuses on a family that lived directly next door. They were known to be different. They were an older family, longtime residents, and somewhat reclusive. One member of this family was known to be a bit strange, described in police reports as a Walter Mitty type, a fantasist. This man and his family had the perfect vantage point. Their house was positioned in such a way that they could see the front of the dream house all day, every day. The police were so focused on this family that at one point the prosecutor's office was preparing to subpoena them. The problem? No evidence. A gut feeling and a perfect vantage point is not a crime. The DNA did not match any known member of that family. They were investigated and ultimately cleared for lack of evidence. Theory number 2, the jealous bidder. This was the new family's first thought. Westfield is a competitive real estate market. A house on that specific street is a trophy. The family had been in a bidding war to get the house. Was it possible that the underbidder, the person who lost, was so consumed with rage and jealousy that they launched this bizarre psychological campaign to scare the new family away? It's possible, but it's also a difficult theory to prove. It would require an incredible level of obsession, and it doesn't explain the DNA or the intimate knowledge of the neighborhood. Theory number 3, the hoax theory. This is the most controversial theory and the one the family hates the most. What if the family wrote the letters themselves? The theory, posted by online sleuths and whispered by neighbors, goes like this. The family bought the house, suffered buyer's remorse, perhaps the house needed more work than they thought, and invented this story as a way to get out of the purchase, or perhaps to collect on an insurance claim. This theory, however, falls apart under scrutiny. First, the family lost an enormous amount of money. They paid the mortgage for 5 years on a house they never lived in. They sold it, in 2019, at a $400,000 loss. This is not the action of a successful con artist. Second, the family passed every single police check. The husband was given a lie detector test, which he passed. The DNA was tested against both the husband and the wife. It was not a match. The hoax theory is, by all investigative accounts, false. Theory number 4, the former resident, the old-timer. This theory suggests the watcher is an older person, someone who either grew up in the house or has lived in the neighborhood for their entire life. This would explain the old-fashioned language in the letters. It would explain the obsession with the history of the house. This person would feel a sense of ownership over the house, and would see the new family, with their renovations and alarms, as invaders. They would be someone hiding in plain sight, a quiet, elderly neighbor, a local historian, someone who, for 60 years, has simply watched. This theory gained new traction recently. Theory number 5, the teacher theory. In 2018, the family, still desperate for answers, pushed the police to investigate a new lead. A male teacher who had worked at a local high school for decades was a known eccentric. He was known for his dark stories and his fascination with local lore. He had lived in the neighborhood. The police, under pressure, investigated. They tested his DNA. It was not a match. However, just this year, new reports have surfaced. The prosecutor's office has allegedly asked for new DNA samples, specifically from a female teacher who has since retired and who had a connection to that same neighborhood. This implies the female DNA they found may have a new lead, But as of today, the prosecutor's office maintains its official stance. The case is open but not active. There are no new leads. The secret of the Watcher's identity remains just that, a secret. The family's dream was over. They were now, in their own words, prisoners of the house. They were trapped in a financial nightmare. In 2016, they tried to sell the house, but they were legally and morally obligated to disclose the letters to any potential buyer. No one wanted to buy a house with a built-in stalker. Desperate, they went to the town planning board with an extraordinary request: allow us to tear the house down. Their plan was to demolish the home and split the property into 2 new, smaller lots, which they could then sell to a builder to recoup their losses. The town, they argued, owed them this. The town's reputation was at stake. The reaction from the neighborhood was hostile. The residents of the street, the same people who had been cooperative with police, came to the town meeting in force. They were not sympathetic. They argued that splitting the lot would ruin the character of their historic street. They argued that the new houses would be too close to theirs. In a packed and reportedly very tense public meeting, the town planning board voted no. The family was denied. They were trapped. The story was now a full-blown national sensation. It was a true crime story, a haunting story, and a real estate nightmare, all in one. The family, after 5 years of terror, finally sold the house in 2019. They sold it for a massive loss to a new family who was aware of the home's history. The new owners, determined to break the spell, moved in, and the town of Westfield held its breath. Did the Watcher finally go silent? No. According to the original family, one final letter arrived. It was sent to the new owners, but it was also shared with them. It was a final, taunting message. The author was not done. And so, the secret remains. Who is the Watcher? Is it the eccentric neighbor watching from a lawn chair? Is it a jealous local angry at the new money? Is it an old-timer grieving for a town that no longer exists? Or is it, as the letters so creepily implied, something in the house itself? A story, a legend that has taken on a life of its own? We may never know. The police say the case is dormant. The family has moved on, their lives forever altered. But the house on the boulevard remains. And somewhere, perhaps very close by, the Watcher is still watching.
In the long and strange history of American crime, there is one case that stands utterly alone. It is not a tale of violence or cruelty. It is a story of audacity, intelligence, and calm. It is the story of a man who, on a cold holiday evening, committed a perfect, impossible act. He acquired a fortune, and then, with the confidence of a ghost, stepped out of a flying airplane and into legend. For over 50 years, the FBI and the world have been haunted by 2 simple questions. Who was he, and why was he never found? This is not just a mystery. It is a void, a perfect vacuum of information. This is the definitive deep dive into the secret of the man who vanished and the flawless crime that has never been and perhaps can never be solved. Our story begins on November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. The scene is Portland International Airport. The mood is calm, business as usual. A man, described as being in his mid-40s, nondescript and polite, walks up to the counter of Northwest Orient Airlines. He purchases a one-way ticket for Flight 305, a short 30-minute hop to Seattle, Washington. He pays in cash. He gives a simple, unremarkable name, a name that would soon become famous, though it was almost certainly an alias. He boards the plane, a Boeing 727.
He takes his seat in the rear, 18C. He is quiet. He wears a dark business suit, a white shirt, and a black necktie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip. He is carrying a black attaché case, a briefcase. He looks, for all the world, like a mid-level executive on his way home for the holiday. The flight takes off on time at 2:50 p.m. As the plane climbs, the man does something simple and world-changing. He signals to a young flight attendant who is seated nearby. She walks over. He hands her a small folded piece of paper. She, assuming it's a lonely businessman giving her his phone number, simply slips it into her pocket. The man leans in and speaks quietly. He reportedly says, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a device." The flight attendant, now alarmed, opens the note in regali. The note, written in neat, all-capital letters, states that he is in possession of a dangerous item in his briefcase. She returns to his seat. He is calm, he is not threatening. He asks her to sit down. He then, briefly and calmly, opens his briefcase just enough for her to see what is inside. She sees a mass of wires and red-colored sticks. It is not a bluff. He closes the case. He is, by all accounts, polite, soft-spoken, and almost gentle. He then dictates his terms. The flight attendant writes them down. They are precise, intelligent, and non-negotiable. First, $200,000. This, in 1971, is the equivalent of $1.4 million today. Second, the money must be in unmarked, non-consecutive $20 bills. Third, 4 parachutes, 2 main parachutes and 2 reserve parachutes. Fourth, he wants food and water for the flight crew upon landing in Seattle. This last detail is telling. He is not a man lost to rage. He is a planner. He is thoughtful. The flight attendant takes these demands to the cockpit. The captain, a seasoned professional, immediately radios the ground. The airline president, not wanting a confrontation in the air, immediately agrees to all demands. For the next 2 hours, the plane circles the Seattle-Tacoma airport. The 36 other passengers on board have no idea what is happening. They are told there is a minor mechanical issue causing a delay. In the back of the plane, the hijacker sits calmly. He orders a bourbon and soda. He pays for his drink. He even offers to buy the flight attendant a drink. He is, by all accounts, the perfect gentleman, who just happens to be taking a 727 hostage. On the ground in Seattle, it is a scene of organized chaos. The FBI is in a race against time. They scramble to collect the $200,000. The local banks have to be called, managers brought in to gather that much cash. They try to get consecutive bills to track them, but they cannot. They are forced to gather random $20 bills, just as he demanded. They photograph all 10,000 bills, a process that takes precious time. Simultaneously, agents rush to a local skydiving school to acquire the parachutes. They get the 4 parachutes, though they are of varying quality. At 5:39 p.m., the plane lands at the dark, rainy Seattle airport. It is parked in a remote, brightly lit section of the tarmac, far from the main terminal. The exchange is made. An airline employee, his arms aching, carries the 21-pound bag of cash and the parachutes to the plane. He hands them to the flight attendant through the rear door. The hijacker inspects the items. He is satisfied. And then he does something remarkable. He releases all 36 passengers. He releases 2 of the 3 flight attendants. His threat is over for them. He has the money. He lets them go. This is not a modern act of terror. This is a transaction, a ransom. Now only 4 crew members remain on board: the pilot, the co-pilot, a flight engineer, and the 1 flight attendant he had been dealing with. He now reveals the second part of his secret plan. This is the part that proves he is not an amateur. He demands the plane be refueled.
He then gives the pilot a highly technical, specific set of instructions for a new flight. The destination? Mexico City. But the way they get there is the key. He orders the pilot to fly at a low altitude, under 10,000 feet. He orders them to fly at a low speed, approximately 185 miles per hour. He orders them to fly with the landing gear down. And, most critically, he orders them to fly with the wing flaps angled at 15 degrees. These instructions would, to a normal person, seem random. To an aviator, they meant one thing. He was creating a stable, low-altitude, low-speed platform. A platform, perfect for a jump. And he had one final, impossible-sounding demand. He instructed the pilot to leave the cabin unpressurized. And he wanted the rear air stair of the 727, the staircase in the tail, to be unlocked. The pilot argued this was insane. The 727 was not designed to fly with the rear stair open. It was dangerous. The hijacker was firm. He said, "Do it." At 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 takes off again, this time into the dark, stormy winter night. The hijacker, now alone with his money, orders the final crew member into the cockpit with the others. "Stay up there," he instructs her, "and close the curtain." That is the last time any human being will ever see him. He is alone, in the dark, in the back of the unpressurized cabin, with $200,000 and 4 parachutes. At approximately 8 p.m., a warning light flashes in the cockpit. It indicates that the rear air stair has been opened. The cabin pressure is fluctuating. The man has opened the door. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the pilots note a sudden jolt to the aircraft, a slight upward movement of the tail. It is a sensation that a skydiver jumping would create. Somewhere over the dense, black, frozen forests of southwestern Washington state, in the middle of a blinding storm, with winds at 10,000 feet exceeding 100 miles per hour, the man did the impossible. He took a 21-pound bag of money, strapped on 2 parachutes, and stepped off the stairs. Into the void. He vanished. The plane, now lighter, continued to fly. The crew, terrified, landed safely in Reno, Nevada, to refuel. The authorities, armed and ready, stormed the plane. It was empty. The man was gone. What he left behind were his fingerprints, which were never matched, his black clip-on necktie, his mother-of-pearl tie clip, and, curiously, 2 of the 4 parachutes. He had left the safe parachutes. He had jumped with the older, less reliable ones. The investigation, codenamed Norjack for Northwest Skyjacking, began immediately. It would become the longest, most expensive, and most frustrating investigation in the history of the FBI. And this brings us to the first answer to our question, why was he never found? Reason 1. The search area was, quite literally, impossible to search. He didn't just jump into the woods. He jumped into a 200-square-mile patch of the most rugged, dense, and unforgiving wilderness in the continental United States. It was late November. The area was mountainous, covered in snow, and crisscrossed with rivers and deep ravines. The weather was brutal. And they didn't know where he jumped. The 8:13 p.m. jolt was just a guess. The search area was a massive, 20-mile-wide, 200-mile-long corridor. The FBI and the military did everything. They flew helicopters, low and slow. They sent in ground teams, 500 soldiers, walking in formation, combing the forest. They found nothing. Not a parachute, not a boot, not a shred of the money bag, not a single trace. The man had not just disappeared, he had evaporated. The sheer physics of the search were impossible. A man jumping in the dark, in a storm, at 10,000 feet, could land anywhere. The search was, from the beginning, a failure. They were looking for a needle not in a haystack, but in a mountain range during a blizzard. Why was he never found? Reason 2. The investigation was drowned in a sea of false leads and perfect suspects. The man became an instant folk hero. He was a modern-day Robin Hood, though he kept the money. He was the man who beat the system, and everyone wanted to be him, or thought they knew him. The FBI's file cabinets groaned under the weight of tips. In the 50 years since, the FBI has investigated and cleared over 800 suspects. The case file is 60 volumes long. This tidal wave of noise made finding the real man impossible. But a few suspects became so plausible, so perfect, that they have dominated the conversation for decades. A man from the West Coast, a war veteran, and a known petty criminal. He was a skilled paratrooper. He looked almost identical to the 1971 composite sketch. He was known to be a boaster and had, in the past, claimed to have committed a similar, though not identical, skyjacking. The FBI investigated him thoroughly. He had an alibi. But for many, he remains the one that got away, a man who fit the profile perfectly. The second plausible suspect? Another war veteran, this one from a highly trained covert operations unit. He was a pilot, an aviation expert, and, his colleagues claimed, the only one they knew who could actually pull this off. He matched the description. He was a loner, and he was brilliant. In the 2000s, an investigative team working with the television network built a massive case against him. They believed 100% that he was the man. The problem? No hard evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA match. He denied it to his grave. The third plausible suspect. This man's story came from his own family. After he passed, his niece came forward, claiming her uncle had shown up to Thanksgiving in 1971, beaten and bruised. She claimed, as a child, she overheard him confessing to the jump. She claimed he was a quiet man, a librarian, who had a hidden, dark, adventurous side. The FBI investigated this claim as well. The man's story was compelling, but again, nothing concrete. It was a family story, a memory, not evidence. This was the problem. The hijacker was, by description, a nondescript man in a business suit. In 1971, this described millions of men. He was a ghost. He was every man. Every suspect was a perfect fit, and every suspect, upon investigation, dissolved. Why was he never found? This brings us to the third and most likely reason. Reason 3. He and his secret did not survive the jump. The FBI and parachuting experts have long maintained that the jump itself was suicidal. He was not a skydiver. He was a paratrooper. A sports skydiver jumps in good weather. This man jumped from 10,000 feet into a minus 70-degree wind chill in a driving storm at night into a dense forest. He did it wearing a business suit and loafers. He also jumped with the less safe parachute. He left the modern, steerable sport chute on the plane and took the old, military-style chest rig chute. The chances of survival were, according to experts, near zero. He would have landed in the dark, in the snow, with 21 pounds of money strapped to him, likely injured, and with no idea where he was. The most probable answer is that the hijacker's story ended just minutes after his legend began. His secret is kept forever by the wilderness. For 9 years, this was the accepted theory. And then, the money showed up. In 1980, a young 8-year-old boy was on a family vacation camping on the banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tenabar. He was digging in the sand, just at the water's line, and he found something. He found 3 bundles of cash. They were rotted, waterlogged, and bound by old rubber bands. The boy's family called the FBI. The agents arrived. They checked the serial numbers. They were a perfect match. Out of the 10,000 bills that were given to the hijacker, these 285 bills were them. $5,800. The only piece of physical evidence from the crime ever recovered. But this truth only created a new secret. How did the money get there? Tenabar was 20 miles south of the official search zone. Did the wind blow him that far? Did he land in the river and the money washed ashore? If so, why only these 3 bundles? Where is the other $194,000? Or did he land, survive, and bury some of the money there, planning to come back but never did? This discovery, the only real clue, made the case more unsolvable. In 2001, science provided one last clue. The FBI, using modern forensics, was able to isolate a partial DNA profile from the black necktie the hijacker left on the plane. This was a breakthrough. Except it wasn't. The DNA profile was too small to be definitive, and it matched no one in any database. They also found on the tie traces of rare minerals, pure titanium, and other elements, suggesting the man worked in a very specific high-tech industry, perhaps at Boeing itself. But again, it was a clue that led nowhere. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the active investigation. They conceded defeat. So why was he never found? Because the search area was impossibly vast. Because the list of suspects was a sea of noise. And because the hijacker himself, whether by surviving or by perishing, was meticulous, intelligent, and, in the end, perfect. Did he get away? Is it possible that an old man, somewhere, is living out his days, smiling at the memory of the night he beat the system? Or did he perish in the wilderness, his story ending just as his legend began, leaving only 3 bundles of rotting pash as his epitaph? This is the secret. We will likely never know who he was, but we will always know what he did. He committed the perfect crime, and then, in one final brilliant move, he simply ceased to exist.